She did not look at him when she said it. Her eyes stayed fixed on the floor-to-ceiling window on the city sprawling 41 stories below, Louisville, Kentucky, gray and enormous and indifferent in the November cold. She stood with her arms crossed and her back slightly turned the way people stand when they want to make clear that the conversation is already over before it begins. 6 months, she said. You and your daughter will be out of my life completely when it ends. Those are the terms. There is no negotiation. Denzel's wash-hosh stood in the center of that office with calluses on both hands and a work jacket that still carried wood shavings in the left pocket. He had driven 3 hours from Shelbyville that morning in a truck with a cracked dashboard. He had expected a storage inventory, not this. He looked at the woman, Caroline Whitfield, 41 years old, CEO of Whitfield Capital Group, one of the most powerful real estate companies in the state of Kentucky, and he took one slow breath through his nose. Then he set the folder she had slid across the desk back down on its surface and said, "That's not how I agree to things." Caroline turned from the window. Her expression did not change, but something behind her eyes did, just slightly, just for a moment. He was going to say yes, he knew it, she probably knew it, but not like this, not on her terms alone. If you need to hear what happened between the beginning of that moment and the end of it, if you need to understand how a man like Denzel Washington ended up in a glass office on the 41st floor negotiating terms with a woman like Caroline Whitfield, then we need to go back to a Tuesday morning in early October, back to a stone gate on Riverbend Road that did not appear on any mapping application he had ever used. His name was Denzel Washington. He was 44 years old. He ran a one-man restoration shop out of a converted barn on the edge of Shelbyville, Kentucky, about 37 miles east of Louisville, where the land flattened out and the traffic thinned and nobody much bothered you if you didn't bother them. He specialized in antique furniture, not the kind you found at estate sales marked down to move, but the real kind, the kind with history locked inside the grain, the kind that took someone who knew how to look to see what it actually was. His hands were his instruments. He could run 2 fingers along the underside of a drawer and tell you within a decade when it was made, which region, which tradition. He could feel where a joint had been repaired and when, and whether the person who did it understood what they were working with or was simply filling a gap. It was a skill he could not fully explain and had never tried to. His father had taught him to look carefully at things the world had decided were finished. That was the whole of it. He lived in a house on Maple Crest Drive in Shelbyville, 3 bedrooms, one of which he used as a workshop overflow when the barn got cold, a porch that needed repainting, and a yard with a single oak tree his daughter Lily claimed as personal property every afternoon when she got home from school. Lily was 19. She was studying architecture at the University of Kentucky in Lexington, 40-something miles west, and she came home most weekends still, which Denzel understood was less about missing the house and more about making sure he was eating correctly. He let her believe the fiction. It cost him nothing and gave her something real to do. Her mother, Sandra, had left when Lily was 15. There was no dramatic story there. Just 2 people who had grown in directions that no longer intersected, and one of them had eventually said so out loud. Denzel had not spoken badly of Sandra to Lily, not once. He had not spoken much about her at all. On the small shelf above the kitchen sink, there was a photograph of the 3 of them at a state fair somewhere in Indiana, Lily maybe 9 years old, squinting into the sun, Sandra laughing at something off-frame. He had never moved it. He had never explained it either. The Tuesday morning in October, he got a call from a law firm in Louisville, Harrington and Voss. The attorney's name was Graham, and he was brief and efficient in the way that attorneys billing by the hour tend to be. An estate in the Riverbend area needed a registration assessment. The family had inherited a collection of pre-Civil War American furniture and needed someone qualified to evaluate its condition, catalog it, and advise on conservation. The rate was $1,200 for the assessment day, with additional contract work to follow if everything aligned. Graham sent him an address. Denzel drove out the following Tuesday in his truck. He found the gate on his second pass of the road. The iron letters above it read Whitfield in the kind of typeface that did not need to announce itself because it had never needed to. He pulled through and followed a half-mile driveway lined with oaks that had gone to copper and rust and the particular red-brown of old blood in the November light. The house at the end was 4 stories of limestone and dark timber, a broad porch running the full front length, 12 windows that caught the morning and held it coldly. The house manager, a woman named Dorothy who had worked the property for 18 years, met him at the front entrance. She was in her late 60s, precise and warm in equal measure, and she handed him a laminated inventory and a floor plan before he had even fully stepped inside. "The pieces in the east parlor are the primary concern," she said. "There's a secretary desk, a settee, and what we believe is an original Belter rosewood cabinet. The family hasn't had anyone qualified look at them since Mr. Whitfield passed. When did he pass? 3 weeks ago." Dorothy's voice dropped a measure. "Miss Whitfield is expected today. If she arrives before you finish, please, give her room." "It's been a hard few weeks," Denzel said he understood. He put on his gloves and went to work. The east parlor was the kind of room that made you quiet without meaning to. High ceilings, dark wainscoting, a fireplace with the grate still holding the remains of the last fire someone had lit in it. The furniture was arranged along 2 walls and in the center, covered with drop cloths, the way things are covered when someone does not know whether they plan to keep them or let them go. He started with the secretary desk, pulled back the cloth, set his kit on the floor beside it, and crouched down to look at the base joints first, the way his father had taught him. You read the bottom before you read anything else, because the bottom is where the truth lives. The wood was walnut, dark with age and oil, the grain tight, and even in the way that 19th century hand-selected timber tended to be. The joints were mortise and tenon, hand-cut, no machine regularity. Pre-1860, certainly. He ran his thumb along the corner and felt the specific give of original hide glue, not the hard brittleness of later synthetic repair. He made a note, moved to the settee, then to the rosewood cabinet. He had been working for about 90 minutes when he heard the front door. He heard heels on the limestone foyer. He heard Dorothy's voice, professional and slightly careful, and then another voice carrying the kind of register that was used to rooms rearranging themselves when it entered. Denzel kept working. He was re-examining the back panel of the cabinet, a section that had been restained at some point, recently within the last decade, in a way that didn't match the original finish. Someone had tried to cover something. He wanted to know what. He was still crouched when the parlor door opened. He did not look up immediately. He finished the note he was writing, capped his pen, and then stood. The woman in the doorway was tall, dark-haired in a charcoal blazer and narrow black slacks. She was attractive in the specific way of someone who had spent years making sure attractiveness was not the first thing a room noticed about her, because there were better weapons available. Her eyes went directly to the cabinet he was working on, then to him. "Dorothy said someone was in here." Her voice was even. "Who are you?" "Denzel Washington. Harrington and Voss arranged the assessment. Graham arranged it without consulting me." She stepped into the room. "I'm Caroline Whitfield. I know." She looked at him the way people look at something that has failed to behave the way they expected. "You know, your father's name is on the gate. The law firm told me who the beneficiary was. It's not complicated." A pause. She crossed to the cabinet and looked at it with her arms folded. "What's your assessment so far?" "The secretary is original and in excellent condition. The settee has had 2 repairs, both sympathetic, both well done. The cabinet," he paused, "someone tried to cover a crack in the back panel about 6 years ago. They used the wrong stain. It's not structural damage. But whoever did it didn't know what they were doing." Caroline looked at the cabinet, then at him. "My father hired someone to repair it, a firm in Cincinnati. They charged him for the quality and delivered something else." He said it simply, not as an accusation, as a fact. Her jaw tightened by a fraction. "What do you recommend?" "I can strip the false finish, repair the panel correctly, restain to match the original, if you want it done right. And if I don't hire you, then whoever you hire next will have the same conversation with you and charge you more for it." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "I need to walk the rest of the house. Dorothy will show you the pieces in the upstairs library. We'll talk when I'm done." She left the room. Denzel watched her go. Then he picked up his kit and followed Dorothy to the stairs. He did not think much about Caroline Whitfield for the remainder of the morning. He was busy. The library held 11 additional pieces of significance, including a matched pair of Pennsylvania Windsor chairs that were in remarkable condition and a writing table that he was almost certain had been misattributed. The construction style pointed to Maryland, not Virginia, and the difference in origin meant a significant difference in value. He made detailed notes. He photographed everything twice. He was back in the east parlor, finishing his documentation on the cabinet when Caroline returned. She did not make small talk. She pulled a chair from beside the fireplace, not a valuable one, an ordinary reading chair, and sat down and looked at him directly. "My father's will has a condition," she said. "A condition I was not told about until after he died." She said it the way people say things they are still in the process of believing. "He left controlling interest in Whitfield Capital Group to me, but the transfer is contingent on my being married within 6 months of his death." Denzel kept writing. He did not look up yet. "I have spent 20 years building this company alongside him," she continued. "I have sacrificed relationships, personal time, most things that other people consider normal to make it what it is. And now he has attached a condition to it that belongs in the 19th century." She stopped, pressed one hand flat against her knee. "I need someone to fulfill that condition, legally, contractually, temporarily." Denzel set down his pen. He looked at her. "You've known me for 2 hours," he said. "I've been on the footgram since Monday." He gave me a background on everyone he contacted. "You're a single father. Your daughter is in her first year at UK, which is not cheap. Your shop does quality work, but you operate close to the margin." She said none of this with cruelty. She said it the way someone reads a report. "You have incentive. I have a problem. This is a transaction." The room was quiet. The fire grate sat cold. Outside, the oaks along the driveway moved in the wind. "What are the terms?" he said. She handed him a folder. He opened it and read in silence. She had clearly had this prepared before his truck turned into the driveway. $43,000 deposited in 2 installments, half on the wedding date, half on the last day of the 6-month agreement. A private ceremony, minimal witnesses. He and Lily, she had accounted for Lily, would move into the estate's East Wing guest quarters for the duration. They would be present at necessary social events. They would be absent from everything else. On the final day, they would leave, and the arrangement would be sealed by a mutual non-disclosure clause that would remain legally binding for 10 years. At the bottom of the last page, in clean legal language, it said, "Any party who violates the terms of this agreement or discloses its nature forfeits all compensation and accepts full legal liability for consequential damages." He closed the folder. He set it back on the surface between them. "No," he said. Caroline blinked. "I beg your pardon." "Not like this. These terms are yours. You drafted them alone, and you're presenting them as settled. They're not." He leaned forward slightly. "I'll consider the arrangement, but I'll have my own attorney review the contract, and there are 3 things I need changed." She stared at him. "Mr. Washington, first, my daughter is not listed as a party to any agreement. She's here because I need her to be, not because you've decided she's useful to the picture. She makes her own choices. Second, $43,000 doesn't cover what I'm actually walking away from for 6 months. 60,000, non-negotiable. Third, the non-disclosure runs both ways." He paused. "And I want it in writing that the restoration work on your father's collection gets contracted to me independently at standard market rate, regardless of how the 6 months ends." The silence that followed was the longest one of the morning. Caroline Whitfield looked at the man across from her, in his worn work jacket and his calloused hands and his expression that was doing absolutely nothing to perform deference. And for the second time that day, something behind her eyes shifted. "You came here to assess furniture," she said. "I came here to do a job correctly," he said. "That's what I do." She picked up the folder, stood. "I'll have Graham revise the terms. I'll expect your attorney's response within 48 hours. You'll have it in 36. She left. And this time, when Denzel watched her go, he picked his pen back up and finished the note he had been writing about the cabinet. What followed those first 2 weeks at the Whitfield estate was not what either of them expected. That much was obvious, even from a distance. Caroline Whitfield had built her professional life around the ability to predict and control variables. She had a gift for reading rooms, reading numbers, and reading people in that order of preference because numbers and rooms never lied to her. People sometimes did. She managed that by keeping the useful ones close and the rest at precisely calibrated distances. She had been this for so long that she had mistaken it for a personality. Lily Washington had her father's patience and her mother's directness, and she did not read rooms. She walked into them and changed them without noticing. Within 48 hours of moving into the East Wing guest quarters, she had reorganized the kitchen's spice shelf into alphabetical order, told Dorothy that her cassoulet was the best thing she had eaten in 19 years, and left 3 different engineering textbooks on the parlor reading table as if the house were her personal library. When Caroline mentioned this to Denzel, he looked at her and said, "She does that. Do you need me to stop her?" Something about the way he said it, not apologetic, not defensive, just asking a direct question, made Caroline pause. "No," she said, "leave it." Denzel's presence in the house was harder to describe. He worked on the furniture restoration in the mornings, starting before 8, the sound of his tools carrying quietly through the East Wing. He was not loud, he was not intrusive, he was simply, consistently, undeniably there in a way that filled the house differently than it had been filled before. He knew where things were after 2 days. He fixed a loose hinge on the study door on day 4 without being asked. When Caroline worked late, which was most nights, she would sometimes pass the parlor and see the light still on and him still at the rosewood-cut cabinet, patient in the way of someone who understood that good work could not be rushed. At breakfast one morning, almost 3 weeks in, she watched him read the same 2 pages of a paperback novel twice. She knew because she had been watching the page count. He hadn't noticed. He was watching Lily through the kitchen window, where she was on the back patio with her sketchbook and a cup of coffee she'd clearly made too strong, because she kept making a face every time she sipped it and then sipping it again anyway. "She's studying the roofline," he said without looking up. "She does that at home with the barn. Drives me a little crazy, and I've never said so." Caroline looked out the window. "Why not? Because she's curious. And you don't discourage curiosity." He turned a page. "Even when it means she's cataloging your building's structural problems at 7 in the morning." Caroline turned back to her coffee. She did not say anything, but she held the cup differently than she usually held things. The social events were the test. Caroline had 4 she needed to cover in the first 2 months: a charity dinner at the Olmsted Club, a real estate consortium reception, a board dinner at the Brown Hotel, and a weekend gathering at the country house of a business associate named Preston Aldridge that she had been dreading since the invitation arrived. Preston's wife, Meredith, was the kind of woman who smiled with the muscles of her face while her eyes performed a different function entirely. At the Olmsted Club dinner 3 weeks in, the evening went smoothly enough until the moment Preston Aldridge arrived at their table and looked at Denzel's the way some men look at things they do not know how to categorize. Preston shook Caroline's hand first warmly with both of his, and then turned to Denzel and waited just 1 beat too long to extend his. "Preston Aldridge," he said. "And you are?" Denzel shook the hand. "Calm, even, full grip. Good to meet you." Preston's smile stayed intact, but his eyes moved to Caroline with a question in them that he was too practiced to ask out loud. "Caroline, I didn't know you were—" "We've been together for some time," Caroline said. Her voice was crisp and entirely composed. "We've kept things private, you understand." Of course, of course." Preston patted Denzel's shoulder the way you pat the shoulder of something you are deciding how to file. "What is it you do, Denzel?" "Furniture restoration, antiques primarily. Interesting." The word landed like a stone in still water. "So you're an artisan. I'm a craftsman," Denzel said. "There's a difference." Preston blinked, laughed. The laugh was real, but it was also automatic, the reflex of a man recalibrating. "Ha! Right, of course." At the table, Meredith Aldridge spent most of the first course asking Caroline about the estate and whether she planned to sell any of the older pieces now that her father was gone, and most of the second course doing the thing where you ask someone questions that are actually statements. "You must find it so different being out in Shelbyville. I imagine it's very quiet out there." Directed at Denzel. Smooth as river water, Denzel set down his fork. I grew up in Louisville. I chose Shelbyville. Some people assume that means I settled. Those people are wrong. He picked his fork back up and continued eating. Meredith's smile thinned by a degree that only someone watching closely would have caught. Caroline was watching closely. After the dinner, in the car on the way back, Caroline sat on the passenger side and looked at the road ahead and said nothing for almost 3 minutes. Then she said, "Preston is going to call me tomorrow with concerns. About me, about you. What will you tell him?" She turned to look at him. He was driving with one hand on the wheel, his eyes on the highway, relaxed in the way of someone who has made a decision they are not currently second-guessing. "I'll tell him what I told him tonight," she said. Which was the truth, he said. She turned back to the road. He had said it simply enough that arguing with it felt strange. The board dinner at the Brown Hotel was where things cracked. Caroline's board of directors was composed of 7 people. 6 of them were the practical kind, interested in numbers, accustomed to change, tolerant of complexity, as long as it produced results. The 7th was a man named Harlan Briggs. Harlan had been her father's closest business partner and personal friend for 31 years. He was 67 years old, silver-haired, and wore the particular expression of someone who had decided how the world worked in 1987 and had been successfully defending that decision ever since. He arrived at the table and saw Denzel. His face did not change. That was the tell. The faces of people who are genuinely untroubled do change. They show the normal small adjustments of social recognition. Harlan's face went to a fixed, careful smile that had clearly been constructed rather than arrived at Caroline. He kissed her cheek. Then he looked at Denzel with his hand extended, fingers together, the shake already planned as brief. "And this is my husband," Caroline said. She had not used that word yet, not once. She said it now with the same voice she used to present quarterly earnings. Harlan's hand completed the shake, of course. He pulled his chair out and sat. "I hadn't realized there was anyone in your life, Caroline." "Your father never mentioned." "My father knew," she said. He approved. It was the first lie she had told. It landed in the air between them and stayed there, slightly heavier than everything else. Harlan spent the dinner being gracious in the way that is actually the opposite of gracious. He spoke around Denzel the way people speak around furniture. He directed questions to Caroline that included clauses requiring her to speak on Denzel's behalf. "Caroline, does he find Louisville's market interesting?" And he told 2 stories from his business history that were clearly selected to establish a radius around the table that did not include anyone of Denzel's background, though he would have expressed genuine offense if someone had pointed this out. Denzel ate his dinner and said little. When he spoke, he was precise. When Harlan asked him, finally directly, perhaps feeling the conversation slipping toward something he had not engineered, whether he had any investment background, Denzel set down his glass and said, "I have a retirement account, a paid-off property in Shelby County, and a business I've run for 17 years without a single year in the red. I don't need an investment portfolio. I built something that lasts." Harlan smiled at this the way one smiles at something that has tried to be more than it is. Of course, the drive home that night was different from that after the Olmsted dinner, Quater. Caroline sat with her hands in her lap and her face toward the window, and around mile 7 she said, "Harlan is going to be a problem." "He already is," Denzel said. She turned. "You saw it." "I saw it in the first 30 seconds, the way he held his fork while he was deciding how to handle the room. He controls 3 of the 7 board votes. He's been positioning for a shift in governance structure since my father's health declined." She paused. "If he decides that this marriage undermines the optics of the company's leadership, he'll move against you." She looked at him. He was watching the road. "Yes, what's your plan?" She didn't answer immediately. Then, "I don't have one, not yet." He nodded, slowly the way people nod when an answer confirms something they already knew. "Then we should think of one." We settled in the car like something that had not been invited but had arrived anyway. The first time Caroline told Denzel something true about herself, something that wasn't a report or a disclosure or a term of the arrangement, it happened in the most ordinary possible way. It was a Sunday in mid-December. Lily had gone back to Lexington the night before. The house was quiet and gray with a flat winter light, and Caroline came into the east parlor where Denzel was working on the Windsor chairs to ask him something about the schedule for the following week. She found him sitting on the floor beside the chairs with his back against the wall and a book open on his knee. He looked up. She asked her question. He answered it. Then neither of them moved. After a moment, she said, without especially planning to, "My father used to read in here. He would sit in the chair by the window with his coffee, and he'd be there until noon, every Sunday." Denzel looked at the chair by the window. What did he read? History, mostly. War history. He had opinions about Gettysburg that I never fully understood. She paused. He also read detective novels and was embarrassed about it. Denzel made a sound that was not quite a laugh but was related to one. My father read the same 5 books on repeat his entire life. Different books, but always the same 5, every year all 5. Why? He said you couldn't really understand a book until the 3rd reading. The first time you're just surviving it. Caroline looked at the chair. My father would have liked that. Neither of them said anything else about it. But the room felt different after that. Not warmer exactly, more accurate. What Caroline did not know, what she had no way of knowing, was that Harlan Briggs had begun making phone calls the week after the Brown Hotel dinner. He was not careless about it. He was methodical and patient, the way people are when they have done this kind of thing before and understand how it works. He contacted 2 of the other board members separately, framing the same concern in slightly different language each time. That Karakaros's judgment, always slightly unconventional, had tipped towards something that could represent a reputational risk to the company's institutional relationships. He used the word erratic with one board member and distracted with the other. He never said anything specific that could be quoted back. With the 3rd board member, a man named Douglas Farewell, who had financial reasons to want Harlan's support that had nothing to do with Whitfield Capital, he was slightly less careful. He said that a woman running a company of this size needed to be above reproach, and that Caroline's personal choices were inviting questions he did not know how to answer on behalf of the board. He suggested that a vote on a governance review might be prudent. He suggested it in the language of concern, the way people suggest things they have already decided on. By January, there were 4 board votes in play. Harlan had done the math. He needed 5 to trigger a governance review that could remove Caroline as CEO pending an audit of her decision-making authority. He reached out to the 5th board member, a woman named Sandra Foss, who had joined the board 14 months earlier and was still finding her footing, and he arranged lunch. He was at his most charming at that lunch. He presented himself as a guardian of the institution, a steward of her father's legacy, someone whose concern was entirely structural and never personal. Sandra Foss called Caroline that same evening. She said, "I think you should know what's being built." She laid it out in the way of someone who was uncomfortable with what they were doing and determined to do it clearly anyway. Caroline sat with the phone against her ear and listened. When Sandra finished, Caroline said, "Thank you, I mean that." She found Denzel in the barn workshop that evening. He had driven back to Shelbyville for a delivery and was loading a piece into the truck. She had not called ahead. She pulled up and got out and stood in the cold and told him what Sandra had said. All of it. He listened with his arms at his sides and his eyes on her face. When she finished, he said, "How many does he need?" "5. He has 4. He tried to get Sandra. She told me instead. Who's the 4th? "Douglas Farewell. He needs Harlan on a separate deal." "He's not ideological. He's bought." Denzel thought for a moment. "Can you separate Douglas from Harlan without exposing Sandra?" "If I move fast." "Then move fast." He turned back to the truck. "I'll drive back in the morning." She stood for a moment in the barn doorway. "You don't have to." "I know I don't." He lifted a wooden crate into the bed of the truck. "I'll see you tomorrow." What happened next took 3 weeks. Caroline moved with the kind of precision she saved for problems that were trying to take something from her. She brought Douglas Farewell into her office on a Tuesday and placed a folder in front of him, a folder containing documentation of a separate transaction that his personal holding company had run through a shell entity, a transaction that was not illegal but was adjacent to something that could become illegal if it were examined closely. She did not threaten him. She did not need to. She simply said, "I wanted you to have this information in case anyone ever asks you about your priorities on the Whitfield board." Douglas Fairwell looked at the folder and then at Caroline, and then rearranged his priorities. Harlan did not know this until the day he called the board meeting he had spent 2 months building toward. He came into the Whitfield Capitol conference room on the 39th floor of the Meridian Tower in Louisville with 4 votes promised and a governance review motion drafted and printed on paper he had clearly chosen for the occasion. He sat down and looked at the table. 7 board members. Douglas Fairwell was on Caroline's left, not his right. Sandra Foss was sitting with her hands folded and her eyes straight ahead. Harlan looked at the room with the expression of a man doing arithmetic that keeps producing the wrong result. He called the motion. 2 voted with him, 5 voted against. The motion failed. In the silence that followed, Caroline put her own folder on the table. She did not open it. She said, "While we're here, I'd like to discuss something." Over the past 8 weeks, members of this board have been approached individually, outside of any formal process, by a colleague attempting to coordinate a governance action. I have documentation of 4 separate conversations. She paused. I have no interest in escalating this into a legal matter. I am interested in being direct about the fact that it happened, that I know it happened, and that it will not be happening again. Harlan looked at the folder. His face had gone the color of old chalk. He looked at Caroline with something working behind his eyes that was not quite calculation anymore. He said, "Caroline Harlan." Her voice was quiet and entirely final. "I think we both know where this is." He did not speak again during the meeting. When it ended, he gathered his materials and left the room without shaking anyone's hand. And the sound of the conference room door closing was the loudest thing in the building for approximately 1 full second. 3 days later, Harlan Briggs submitted his resignation from the Whitfield Capitol Board of Directors, citing personal health considerations. Caroline read the letter at her desk with Denzel sitting across from her, in the same chair he had been sitting in the first day he came to this office. She set the letter down. "He wrote it himself," she said. "He didn't have his attorney do it. Means he understood what he did wrong," Denzel said. "Or means he was too embarrassed to explain it to an attorney. Maybe both." She looked at him. He was looking at the letter. There was no satisfaction in his face, no victory, just the expression of someone watching a thing come to its correct conclusion. That absence of performance was, she realized, one of the things she had been looking at for 4 months without naming it. The 6 months ended on a Tuesday in early April, which was how it had begun, on a Tuesday in October. Caroline sent Denzel the second installment of the agreed payment on a Monday morning. He acknowledged it with a text message that said, "Received. Thank you for honoring the terms." She read it 3 times. Then she picked up her phone and called him. He answered on the second ring. "The furniture restoration contract," she said. "You haven't submitted the final invoice. I'll have it to Graham by end of week." A pause. Outside her office window, Louisville was green and rain-washed, the trees along the waterfront finally filling in. "The East Parlor looks different now," she said. "Better, yes." She pressed her thumb against the edge of her desk. "Lily sent me a photograph of the chair by the window." Lily had driven out to the estate 2 weeks earlier, alone, to pick up a sketchbook she'd left in the library. Dorothy had let her in. Lily had apparently spent an hour in the East Parlor and taken a photograph of the Windsor chair positioned in the window light, the one her father had restored and placed there. She'd sent it to Caroline with a message that said only, "He did that right. She's going to be remarkable," Caroline said. "She already is." His voice was even and unhurried. "She always has been." Another silence, longer than the ones before it. The kind of silence that only exists between people who have spent enough time together that they know how to be in one without filling it. "There's a condition in my father's will," Caroline said, "that I never told you the full text of. The condition is that I be married for 1 year. Not 6 months." She stopped. "Graham told me when the 6 months was up. He should have told me at the beginning." "I should have told you." "He told you to wait," Denzel said. "It was not a question. He thought I'd have more leverage at the end of the period." She paused. "He was wrong about that. So you have 6 more months of a problem. I have 6 more months of a requirement." She turned her chair toward the window. "The difference matters to me. He was quiet for a moment, then, "What are you asking me?" "I'm asking if you would be willing to extend the arrangement under new terms, terms that we both agree to." "From the beginning, what would the new terms be?" "I don't know yet," she said. "That's why I'm asking you." The rain had started again outside. She could hear it against the glass from 41 floors up, which meant it was the kind of rain that meant something today. She waited. "My truck needs a new alternator," he said. She blinked. "I'm sorry, I've been putting it off. It's about $700. "I've been managing around it for 3 months." He paused. "I want to say yes to what you're asking. I also want you to know that I'm aware of the gap between your world and mine. I don't want the gap to become a performance we both get tired of." "I'm not asking for a performance," she said. "I've had enough of those." "Then what are you asking for?" She turned the chair back toward the desk. On the desk was the folder from October, which she had never put away. The folder she'd had prepared before his truck turned up the driveway. She looked at it. "I'm asking for honest terms," she said. "Between two people who have seen each other in a difficult 6 months and are still willing to be in the same room." A long pause. Outside the rain, inside the quiet. "Get Graham to draft new terms," he said. "I'll have my attorney review them in 36 hours. She heard something in his voice that she was not going to name out loud, not yet, but she recognized it the way you recognize a piece of furniture that has been misattributed for years, by the grain, by the weight, by the thing you feel when you put your hand on it and understand, finally, what it actually is. "I'll call Graham today," she said. "All right, Denzel." "Yeah, your truck," she paused, "fixed the alternator." A brief silence. Then, "Yes, ma'am." He said it the way someone says something that has weight behind it that the words themselves don't fully carry. She held the phone a moment after the call ended. The rain moved against the glass. The city was enormous and indifferent below, and on the 39th floor of the Meridian Tower in Louisville, Kentucky, Caroline Whitfield sat at her desk with her hands flat on its surface and looks at a folder she had prepared with perfect confidence 6 months ago. In what she was beginning to understand had been a very different version of herself. She put the folder in the bottom drawer. She did not throw it away, but she put it where things go when they are finished. Sometimes the person standing in front of you with calluses on their hands and wood shavings in their jacket is carrying something the world has decided not to look at. Sometimes the life that looks simple from the outside is the only life in the room that has been built to last. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the transaction you thought you were entering turns out to be something else entirely by the time the terms have run their course. Denzel Washington drove back to the Whitfield estate the following morning in his truck, with the radio on low and the window racked, the way he always drove. The alternator held. The driveway oaks were green and new, unrecognizable from the copper rust of October. He parked, took his kit from the bed of the truck, walked to the front door. Dorothy opened it before he could knock. "She said you'd be early," Dorothy said. He stepped inside. The house was the same house, but he had learned years ago, standing at a workbench with his father, that the same thing looked at carefully enough is almost never the same thing twice. You just have to be willing to look. He was.